our edition, a discussion about Brooklyn, a borough of New York that has been the scene, past and present, of an assortment of controversies. I'll be joined by two longtime Brooklynites, Reverend C. Herbert Oliver, a 45-year resident, and Dr. Carlos Russell, who has lived in Brooklyn just about the same length of time. Both have been involved in an assortment of issues in Brooklyn down through the years. We'll get started in a moment. Gentlemen, welcome to Like It Is. I should say welcome back.
Thank you.
But my question to you, to get right to the case here, is what is your report card on Brooklyn today as opposed to Brooklyn yesterday when you arrived some 4 decades ago? Has it been a upward incline or a decline?
Well, when I arrived in 1966, it was a time when I would say there was an upward movement in Brooklyn. People were striving for a better life, for a better system of education, and I became involved in that at an early time and contributed 3 years of my life trying to improve the educational system in the city so that black people and Puerto Ricans and Latinos could get an education that would prepare them for the future.
Tell me, did the civil rights movement have an impact on the movement in Brooklyn?
I think it did. I think the civil rights movement in Birmingham helped to inspire.
That's your hometown.
That's my hometown. Helped to inspire activities in Brooklyn, and people were very much, I think, they had been taught, let's say, by what they saw in Birmingham, and were ready to do something in Brooklyn that would help bring a change there, just as a change was brought in Birmingham.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Russell.
I arrived in Brooklyn in 1961, and in 1961 Brooklyn was dynamic and virulent. But there's a misconception, I think, about Brooklyn, because Brooklyn has always been very active politically. For example, prior to 1948, there were no black elected officials in Brooklyn at all. Yet in 1946, two black women, Maud B. Richards and Ada Jackson, one running for the American Labor Party, that was Ada Jackson, and Maud B. Richardson working as a Republican, ran against John Walsh. Two women against a white man, and at that time in the 17th Assembly District.
Describe for me, though, what the climate was in the community. Were things on the uprise, upswing, or what?
When I got there, as I said, it was virulent, it was dynamic, it was movement, because it was for the first time that blacks were attempting to get political power. In 1953, Brooklyn got its first legitimately elected official. That was George Flagg. Prior to that, they got Bertram Baker, but that was an arrangement that was made with the Democratic Party that grew out of the struggle based on Maud B. and Ada Jackson. So see, in fact, downtown Brooklyn, George Morton, in 1920-something, ran for judge. So they were doing things. Now, when I got to Brooklyn, Thomas Russell Jones, had already developed the Unity Democratic Club. And he and Shirley and so forth, and Andy Cooper and Pat Carter were working in terms of, how do I put it, moving a political movement forward. They were the ones that challenged the entrenched Democratic machine in Brooklyn.
Well, what about the education? There was a big challenge in the mid-60s out in Ocean Hill, Brownsville. And you were in the thick of it, Reverend Oliver.
Yes.
It was funded by the Ford Foundation.
Yes, the Ford Foundation.
Who put up the money for an experimental school district.
Yes.
What happened?
Well,
And what was the premise of doing that? That the existing educational system was wanting?
Was failing the youngsters in the inner city. So the Board of Education, the UFT, the United Federation of Teachers, and the Ford Foundation came together to create a new system whereby they would address those issues and try to improve education in 3 districts. And the idea was that however it was done, it was hoped that something could be done to make education better for the kids in the schools.
There was a hue and cry, community control.
That came along as these groups developed, because community control is American. All over the country, the local communities control the schools. And we simply raised that cry because it was not something new. It was something that was going on all the time. But
Not in Brooklyn.
not in Brooklyn, and not in any place where blacks reside. Blacks never had community control in this country. This was the first attempt to get community control in this country. And we made a gallant effort. We were eventually defeated by the UFT.
One of the things that falls with that, Gail, is that we have to remember that a number of things were acting in Brooklyn at the same time. You mentioned the Civil Rights Movement. Well, the Congress of Racial Equality, and I think, excuse me, it's either Du Bois and Oliver Reed had, for example, they led boycotts in terms of the school system in Brooklyn. We also had Reverend Milton Delamison that, in conjunction with the struggle for community control, which is different from decentralization, to have the schools, independent schools within the churches. In fact, today when you talk about the paraprofessionals, the people that taught and manned the schools in Brooklyn were those who were paraprofessionals. Then the UFT got slick and absorbed them. So now we lost the troops and the folks that marched and worked to keep the schools open. So when you look at Black Brooklyn, you cannot look at it as it is today, because today they lack that vibrancy. In those days, there was more of a, from my perspective, a holistic view of black folks within the context of the civil rights struggle and the context of where we as an African people were going.
Well, as I got wind of it, the grievances that existed in those days is that the school system was insufficient in our communities, and that black people, the residents, should have some say over the kind of education. And they won the right to have say over the teachers and the curriculum and whatever in this experimental school district, Ocean Hill, Brownsville. And that's when, as they say on the street, it hit the fan.
Well, it was not just Ocean Hills, Brownsville. In Harlem, that IS-201 with Charlie Wilson as the head.
That's true.
Okay. And there was one on the lower east side.
And Dave Spencer is chairman.
There you go. Dave Spencer was chairman of the
But what happened in Brooklyn?
Well, Brooklyn, he was the chairman of the board.
Well, I want to hear that, Reverend Oliver, but we need to take a break. So we'll continue in the next segment. We'll be back right after this. So, Reverend Oliver, what happened to cause the whole thing to collapse with the experimental school district?
In a nutshell, the governing board transferred 17 teachers and 2 principals and reassigned them to the Central Board of Education for them to work in another district. And that was interpreted as a firing without due process. We did
They
not
weren't
fire.
fired.
No, they were not fired.
They were transferred.
Transferred. But that went out over the newspapers that we had fired them. And that continued to, people still believe that today. However, the school, rather about 400 teachers went on strike in early 1968 and stayed out of the district for six weeks.
Why?
They protested the transfer of the personnel to the Central Board of Education.
Was there any ethnic overtones to this? Were there any?
We had no notion that there was anything ethnic involved. We found out later that we were accused of being anti-Semitic, but we were not concerned with whose ethnicity it was. If people were supporting the governing board and helping us to work, we were glad to have them, but there were some who were not, and those were the ones who were transferred.
Okay. All right, now we've covered 2 important developments. You're talking about the political organizing that took place, And you're talking about the kind of renovations that were made in the school system, even though it ran into a brick wall. There were some other things that took place in Brooklyn. There was a coalition sometime later. They called it the Coalition for a Just New York, which tried to build a political base of power, as I understand it.
Well, that was much later.
I know.
That was very much later. And that was an attempt to run Herman Badillo for mayor of the city of New York. And they brought together most, if not all, of the major political players at the time. And what happened in a real sense is that in Harlem, the Harlem leadership decided to run Denny Farrell, or Herman Farrell, against Badillo, and that split the coalition. And that split of the coalition, in my judgment, has repercussions up till today, because part of the difficulty between, well, today we say Hispanics and blacks. In those days you used to say Puerto Ricans, because the Puerto Ricans constituted the major Latin element within the city of New York.
Those were the two elements that
Yeah,
were
but they were,
coming together.
yes. So what happened was that you had Farrell against Badillo, and I think if my memory is correct, Bean was the white guy that won. You see, and that division, because Harlem supported Farrell while the others supported Badillo, and had Badillo run, there are those who today would argue that the relationship between Spanish-speaking and black New Yorkers would be closer. But you see, but that was the end. But prior to that, there were so many different things happening in Brooklyn, politically speaking. I remember that Tyrone Woods and Hudson Reed came and asked me to be Al Van's campaign manager. And you have to remember, Al Van and G.T. Wilsey were part of the Oceanville.
He was a teacher.
He was a teacher, head of the African American Teachers Association. Now, that was the first time that a quote-unquote nationalist was running for political office. They were saying that you could not do that. There was a big split, that you cannot run for political office and be a nationalist. He was the one that made that split. There was another thing that happened at that time, which is very Brooklynite. The Reverend William Augustus Jones ran for borough president, and I was his campaign manager. He lost. But the trick about that, what was difficult about that, in his church, one of his deacons was Thomas Fortune, who was head of the Unity Democratic Club. When the votes were counted, Reverend Jones got more votes from Canarsie than he got from Central Brooklyn. Okay, because Tom Fortune was still so identified with Abe Stark and the Democratic machine, while Reverend Augustus Jones was tied in to the anti-war movement. Remember, that is 1968, the Vietnam War, and things are happening. So Brooklyn is not isolated. And we also have to deal with, in 1972, you have the Gary Convention, Black Political Convention, in which Brooklyn plays an extremely important part with Abu Badika, Sonny Carson, and Walter Stewart, are the two people that are working there. In the interim also, you have the struggle between Sam Wright, which became the enemy of the Ocean Hill, Brownsville thing that you talked about. So when you talk about Brooklyn, you just can't put it in little pieces, all interwoven with a number of internecine, negative, and sometimes positive texture.
That's the nature of my problem. We've got to get this story into a half-hour program, but it's kind of rough.
I know.
But let's move ahead in giant strides, time constraints notwithstanding. We're jumping forward to today. And what is your assessment of the empowerment of the black community in Brooklyn, the health in the black community, the climate, educationally, etc.? How would you evaluate things today? An improvement from yesterday?
I would say no. I would say we do not have empowerment, that is, black empowerment in Brooklyn now. We hope that that will come in the future. Perhaps something can be done in the upcoming election, but we do not have it. In my judgment, we are still on a plantation. And we have so much of the political leadership of this country, and in particular New York and Brooklyn, who are still on the plantation. I think of Harriet Tubman, who went into the jaws of hell 19 times and brought people out of slavery. She did not try to keep them in slavery and make money off of them. She brought them out of slavery, risking her life every time, and she had no education whatsoever. But with all the education we have around, we have so many leaders who still want to stay on the plantation and to stop everyone else who wants to get off of the plantation.
Well, let me question both of you. You're both involved in the educational realm. We only have 30 seconds for the beginning of the answer. How would you evaluate the education in Brooklyn? Has it improved?
Look, education,
30 seconds.
education should be an instrument for liberation. It has not improved because we do not control the institutions. To change things in this system, we have to control institutions. When you talk about empowerment, you have to control the element that gives you power. We use the term empowerment, but we are not empowered. We are still, as Reverend said, on the plantation, and we're falling into the trap where the political leaders of yesterday, they were striving to change the system. Now they're striving to accommodate and personal aggrandizement.
All right. We need to take a break. And we'll be back after this.
Colleen and Maureen are identical twins, have identical cars with identical auto body damage. They typically do everything together, with few exceptions. Colleen uses Maaco, and Maureen another auto body shop in town. The results, both cars look great, but Colleen's car was repaired faster and cost $400 less. On average, Maaco repairs cost 33% less than at body shops and car dealers. For quick service, great prices, and guaranteed seamless repairs, better get Maaco, America's Cosmolution specialist. Nobody can do what Maaco does. Maaco can repaint your entire car, fast. In most cases, just a few days. Our economical ambassador paint service is only $229. Make it easy, make it right, make it Maaco.
Shop for new carpet without ever leaving home. Call Empire today. We'll bring quality brand name samples to your home and expertly measure your rooms. And no waiting for your new carpet. Empire professionally installs next day. Best of all, you'll save with warehouse direct prices plus no payments till 2008. Shop at home, next day installation, and no payments till 2008. It's the Empire way to shop for carpet. Call now.
800-588-2300 Empire.
I'm Senator Bob Menendez, and I approve this message.
Tom Kean Jr. is running a negative smear campaign. Why? Because he doesn't want you to know he'll be another vote for the Bush agenda. Kean Jr. supports Bush's failed war in Iraq, voted twice to privatize Social Security, 6 times against stem cell research, and he wants to eliminate taxes on inherited fortunes like his own, but voted against raising the minimum wage. Republican Tom Kean Jr., just another vote for Bush's agenda.
This month we celebrate our Hispanic roots during Hispanic Heritage Month. This is the time to embrace our varied cultures and traditions, and the Latinos who have served as role models to the Hispanic community. People like Antonio Villaraigosa, Emilio Engoria Estefan, and Hector Lavoe, who have strived to show all Hispanic Americans that we can all contribute to this country in great ways.
Stop and shop. ChevyOffers.com and ABC7 recognize the many achievements of Hispanic Americans. Join us in celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month.
So, you're not giving a good report card on the status of education. It's still insufficient. What about the impact of that? We see a lot of activity among our young people that concerns those who are no longer young. We see all kinds of activity in the community, and there's a lot of bloodshed, not limited to Brooklyn, but I just want to talk about Brooklyn. What do you have to say about this, gentleman?
Look, the fundamental problem from my perspective is that we are attempting to separate what happens in Brooklyn from what happens with the country as a whole. The society in which we live is a violent society, a greed-ridden society, a society that lies on hypocritical the institutions that exist within this society, by definition, reflect that basis. And they are not, unless black people, Africans in the diaspora, begin to retake and return to black as we once did, by controlling our constitution, not decentralizing, by challenging the basic tenets upon that's being advocated today. You cannot talk about education. Today education is seen as passing a test. But that is not education. Education is supposed to help an individual to become a meaningful person within the society, one who can think.
Reverend Oliver, do you know whether young people are being told in the classroom about what happened in the 60s?
No, they are not told at all. I was invited to a school last week to share with them, but that's the only time. I've never been invited back to the Board of Education schools to say anything about Ocean Hill-Brownsville. I would say that the problem that we're facing is not just Brooklyn and Long. I agree with you that it's systemic, it's nationwide. And to just give an example, you take the recent strike with the Toussaint's Union.
Yeah, the Transit Workers Union.
Transit Workers Union. What did they do to him? After 3 days of strikes, he had to spend 10 days in jail. When the UFT struck in 1968, they struck for 6 weeks. Nobody even thought of going to jail. Not only did they not go to jail, they were paid for all the time that they broke the law. That's what happened then.
Time is not on our side, gentlemen, and I have to ask you, what is your prescription for cure? We don't see enough activism? Does there need to be that? What?
We have to return to the streets. We have to, in my judgment, begin once again to help our youngsters to make the connection between yesterday and today. They assume that the struggle is over. It is not over. We have to help them to understand, for example, that they are prepared to go and sacrifice their life in Iraq, while here in Brooklyn, they kill each other and do not understand that part of the reason that there's no unemployment, that they fill the jails, that the schools don't relate to them. It is a task that we must take. We cannot expect those who oppress us to free us. We must free ourselves.
So when you say we need to take to the streets, you mean
we have
protest movements,
we have to start organizing housing. We have to organize on the streets. We have to raise our voice. You see, what is his name? Made a mistake. Bear Brosnan once said we have to leave the streets and go to the suites. We have to go back to the streets. The streets will lose in the suites. We must win in the streets.
Is that a serious problem that some have moved into the suites and have developed amnesia from our community?
Yes, the suites have not helped us at all.
It's S-U-I-T-E-S?
Right. They have not helped us at all. We need to get back to people, the people who, the common, ordinary, grassroots people. That's where it all begins, and that's why I'm concerned about the killings, not only in Brooklyn, but all over the country. Grassroots blacks are being killed all over the country, and hardly a protest is being raised now. To me, that's very serious.
We'll have to say that's all there is time for. But let me just stretch a bit. Gentrification, is or is it not in progress in Brooklyn? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. That's all we have time for. Forgive my being so rude, but you understand, don't you? Thanks for being with us. This discussion will go on.
Share your thoughts on what you've seen. Let us know what you think about this week's Like It Is with Gil Noble. Log on to www.7online.com. Click on the Like It Is.
It will be a continuation of last week's discussion about Brooklyn, both past and present. My guests, Reverend C. Herbert Oliver and Dr. Carlos Russell, both have been activists in Brooklyn for over 40 years. They've got a lot to say, as you'll see. We'll get underway after this. We've been talking about remedy. We didn't finish, though, with the diagnosis of many of the things that are troubling both of you and many others in Brooklyn. There's a lot of concern about the gangs and the bloodshed. And I would like to ask both of you whether you think it's hinged to the deficiencies in the school or the deficiencies in the community of the home, or all of the above?
For me, it's all of the above. If one takes the position in attempting to isolate the violence as if it were something that only youngsters do, one would have to argue that it's endemic to them, that it's genetic. When that is not true, the behavior that one sees is generally a reflection of the social values, the milieu in which one lives. Now, what we tend to see very often is a reaction to oppression, a reaction to being marginalized, a reaction to be left out. It is what Joy Leary also calls post-enslavement
Post-traumatic slave syndrome.
And so what I'm saying is that we are not really looking at the causes when we look at the relationship between blacks and the society. We tend to focus on the symptoms. Now, if you want to change, you have to look at the cause. And the cause, for me, is a society that values material things more than human life. It is contradictory for me to live in a society where there's an abundance of wealth in the midst and find so much poverty. If those who govern wanted to change the situation, then the distribution of the wealth would be much, much different than what happens. But of course, my view is considered idealistic and unreal because those in power will never give up power. Frederick Douglass says, power concedes nothing, it never has and never will. Man may not get all he pays for, but he certainly must pay for all he gets. Well, we have to pay for what we get.
How do you see it, Reverend Hoffer?
Again, I see a systemic problem here. I see the thinking of black people is plantation thinking. And I'm very much concerned about that. That's a recent discovery of mine, but I think that that's a very serious problem.
You're saying this generally for each and every, or a lot?
Generally, for each and every.
Each and every has a plantation philosophy.
Yes, because we still think like we're on a plantation and that someone is over us telling us what to do, either white overseers or black overseers. We've had the white overseers, but the whites have gotten smart enough to get black overseers to do the job for them. And we think we're free, but the black overseers are keeping us on the plantation.
I see.
Now, this must be addressed and dealt with. Why should someone like Alton Maddox be denied the right to practice his calling when he went by the law and respected the client, the attorney privileges? He was disbarred for that, or he was not allowed to continue his practice for that. He kept the law. And yet this year, an attorney who engaged in a shootout and a robbery did his time, came back, went to school, and now he's practicing law in the same court that denied Maddox the same. Something is systemically wrong. So this must be addressed, I feel.
Does it have anything to do with our economic empowerment or lack thereof?
I don't think so. We have all them. We're just loaded with money. Blacks are just rich with money.
Do we have any businesses? Do we have any economic leverage in our communities, especially in Brooklyn?
Nothing to speak of countrywide.
I'm going to get in trouble. But let me go ahead. We, again, when you say do we have, we don't control the sources, the means of production. We don't. Most of our money comes from working from someone. We control no major institutions, no major economic institutions. The money that we make are in sports, are working for someone else. So that's not real money. The people that
Why do we allow that?
It's not that because that's a very good question. Because we are still on the we are on a plantation controlled by white overseers, and we've never challenged that overseers in a real sense. We have no vision of where we want to go. We see ourselves as Americans within the total structure without challenging the direction of America. Malcolm said it that because you sit at the table does not make you a diner. We assume that we are diners. We are not diners. We have to challenge the very essence of where this country is going. We have to call for a radical reconstruction of this society. If we have that radical reconstruction and we move to control institution, then the possibility of having impact and influence on the major means of production within the society, then the question of empowerment comes to fore.
It's a lot of money that is being made by outsiders in black communities like Brooklyn. All right? There are very few businesses, whether they're storefront or otherwise, that are black owned. And there is a saying that if you don't really have any economic suasion, you can't impact on how government or education or anything else operates. But what do you say to that?
Take 125th Street. How many black-owned businesses are in the whole of 125th Street from river to river? Any at all?
One that I know of.
In the heart of the black neighborhood? Of course, people come from elsewhere and make their money off of the black neighborhood, and the government set it up that way, and they're keeping it that way.
Is it also operable in Brooklyn? Is it the same thing in Brooklyn?
Same thing.
Very few black businesses.
In the middle of Bedford-Stuyvesant, same thing's true.
My brother, we own mom and pop stores. That's not it. That's not economic empowerment. That's not being an entrepreneur. That's like selling pencils and pens on the subway and calling yourself an entrepreneur. Prior to integration in this society, black folks did have economic institutions. We had doctors, we had lawyers, we had funeral morticians. We controlled. But someone told us that in order to be a human being, you had to be like white people. You had to be integrated. And in so doing, we gave up those areas of economic empowerment in a real sense. So what we are finding now is that we are attempting, in my judgment, to accommodate ourselves to a system that does not respect us. We are economic wannabes, and we are not investing or attempting to change our economic relationships. The objective is to self-aggrandizement, not collective. We have lost the view of community. We have lost the connection with the base, the grassroots.
Downtown Brooklyn, pretty much similar to 125th Street in Harlem, loaded with fast food stores that are making a killing, all right? And none of them are franchised by black people that I'm aware of. Could that make a difference?
Look, I'm sorry, Reverend.
It's all right. A very small difference. A very small difference. Mm-hmm. I'd like to move on to another pet subject of mine, and that is with reference to this whole country and citizenship. We have never taken that seriously. When we read the Constitution, there is no definition of a citizen at all. And when the country tried to deal with that for black people, they put forth the 14th Amendment. But the 14th Amendment was never ratified. It was only declared ratified by the Secretary of State, William Seward, but it was never ratified with the proper votes. Andrew Johnson never signed it. If it doesn't have his signature, it's not law. It is not law. So there are no black citizens, constitutional black citizens in the country. And add to that the fact that since there is no definition of a citizen for anybody, even white people, there's no definition, there's nothing in the Constitution that proves that they are citizens either.
Well, what do you have to say about the recent re-signing of the voting rights bill?
The voting rights.
Many have said, why do we have to have a voting rights bill if we're supposed to be citizens?
The voting rights bill is proof that we're not citizens. You don't have to do that for citizens. You don't have to renew it ever so often, as is done with that. That's proof that we're not citizens.
If you were a citizen, you wouldn't need a Voting Rights Act.
Yeah. So we are not citizens. People of African American ancestry are not citizens of this country. Now, when you look at the white population who founded the country and on down to the present, neither are they, because there is no definition of a citizen in the Constitution whatsoever. In Iraq, they have a definition of a citizen in that Constitution that America went over there and forced on those people. Ghana has its own definition of citizen. Most countries have a definition of citizens. The French Revolution in 1791, they defined, when they put the Constitution together, they defined a citizen. This country never did and has not to this day. So we do need a constitutional convention to address that problem. And if we can do that, we
find the awareness level in our community
It's not there.
commensurate with what it is that has to be done?
It's not there.
But
And how does one remedy that? Excuse me.
Again,
A program like this.
yes.
Oh,
Not only that, going back to controlling the institutions. The educational institutions should be the places where one is able to pass on to youngsters ideas and concepts and principles that they will need to live. If those institutions are controlled by those whose values are different to ours, they by definition will promote and project their values. So that's why Ocean Hill, Brownsville, that's why those schools were so important, because it tended to open the eyes of our youngsters as to who they were, what it meant to be black, what it meant to be Hispanic, the relationship between Africa and America, the difference between slavery and enslavement, what lynching. There are many young people today do not believe that lynching really took place. You know, and if you ask them who was
because
Malcolm,
it's not in the curriculum.
it's not in the curriculum. It's not. In fact, in Philadelphia, I understand that they were attempting to include in the public system a curriculum that relates directly to the history of not history in a traditional sense, but an analysis of the historical involvement of Africans in the Americas and in the United States. And so our youngsters today believe that everything is okay.
Well, Reverend Oliver, wouldn't a more adequate educational system put a lot of light on what you said a little while ago
It certainly
about
would.
understanding the realities and the flaws
It certainly
as
would.
you see it in the Constitution?
It most certainly would. That's what we need. That's what we were hoping to do in Ocean Hill, Brownsville, but we were not. We didn't get to do it. But coming through the schools, that would be the normal place for it to come. But you can't get that into the
Well,
schools.
there's some who say, look, I got to get an education so I can make something of myself, get myself a good job, and, you know, the rest will come later if I have time.
My brother, there's a difference between education and training. One trains for a job, one educates for life. Okay, we have to be very clear about that. We have permitted people to use language to focus on a particular route. For me, again, I believe that we can create alternative approaches to gaining the kind of education that you are speaking of, that we are speaking about. It seems to me that the churches that we control, when we control those institutions, the Jewish people have their black yeshivas and their Jewish yeshivas. We can have black yeshivas in our schools where we can take responsibility for doing some of the kind of educating that we are talking about, raising the level of consciousness so black people begin to understand what the reality is all about. You cannot depend on an institution controlled by others to free you, and we are still doing that. We cannot believe that just to pass a test makes you educated, as I said earlier. You have to help us, we have to help each other to think things through.
Believer in context and history and background.
Mm-hmm.
In order to understand today, you have to understand yesterday. But we did start this discussion in the previous program, focusing on Brooklyn. And I really want to get some here and nows covered. There's a discussion now that gentrification, which really started, as they say, in Harlem, has now spread to Brooklyn. Do you concur?
Yes.
That blacks are being moved out
Moved out.
and whites are being moved in and the houses are being spruced up?
That's happening in Brooklyn now. And the powers that be, the political leaders, the black leaders, are presiding over it now. That's a tragedy.
Well, there's a little thing called money, and there's some moneyed people who have an interest, it is being said, to see the regentrification. There are big plans underway for total change of the profile and the face of downtown Brooklyn.
You speak of gentrification and downtown Brooklyn. Downtown Brooklyn, at the earlier part of this century, was essentially black. People faithful that. And what central Brooklyn, what the Bed-Stuy today, was Irish. You had Congressman Q, Congresswoman Kelly, you had Stuart Carney. That was what it looked like. Then they moved out and we moved in.
Yes.
What happened is that white people recognized that by fleeing, they were losing more, and their sons and daughters said, let us get back and get control of the territory that's closer, that gives them. For instance, if you live downtown Brooklyn, the prices are cheaper than Manhattan, but more expensive than what Brooklyn used to be. Now you have transportation, so they moved out, the blacks. When I came to Brooklyn and lived in downtown Brooklyn, really, and I was the head of the poverty program on Ashland Street, those were rooming house, single room house that you could get for $9,000, a building you could buy. Now to buy a building in downtown Brooklyn, you can't get one for less than $1.2 million. So when that happens, it also changes the political reality of the system, and they do it in many ways. But we have not, collectively as an African people, in my judgment, moved to retain power. When you say that we still want to be next to, we still feel that it is important to be what Spike Lee would call it, wannabes. So the gentrification has a double sword, that we are feeding into it. And since we do not have the power to fight against it, we let it happen. The same thing, the schools that we began to, we talked about decentralizations. Well, when the actual mayor moved to re-centralize the system, where were the black elected officials? They agreed. So once again, you find that the educational system is re-centralized under this mayor. And all of the black leadership and the Hispanic leadership and the progressive leadership stayed quiet.
There's some developers, though, that have big plans for downtown Brooklyn. And there are those who are saying that black people are not included in those plans except as consumers, but not as entrepreneurs. What do you have to say about that?
Business as usual. Plantation psychology. It's all over again. And until we wake up, that is what's going to happen. And I would say that we have to be careful with these low interest loans that people can get on their homes. And you have to watch your principal, because with these low interest loans, the more you pay, the higher your principal goes. Unless you notice that and you think that you're paying down, you're getting deeper and deeper into debt, and in time you will lose your house with a low interest loan. That's part of the gentrification process.
One of the things with downtown Brooklyn, and you really have to be careful when you analyze, and you're talking about the Atlantic Yards. From my understanding, a great bulk of the homes that's being argued to save, etc., are owned by white people. Black people are not in that trend as such, as a whole.
No, just residents,
Not
exactly. Owners.
We're not owners. Okay, now, and those buildings, many were paid money by the developers, huge money for the homes. The second thing that is happening, I don't know whether this is actually, but I've heard that it is, that the developer, the developer of the stadium in Philadelphia will be making the black company, black people, who will be doing the same thing in downtown Brooklyn. So there are a number of, we have to look beneath the surface to understand exactly what is happening. I am not sure, and I mean it, I am not sure that it has clear cut. Gentrification is happening in downtown Brooklyn, but I'm not certain that this development thing that we're talking about is reflective of that, but rather the attempt of some white people to control the system. And since we have no mechanism, some are trying to ride that horse as far as they get it. Whether or not that would happen in terms of individuals, I don't know. But I'm not so quick to jump on the bandwagon and say, yeah, the Atlantic Yards is the next. It could bring jobs in the area. It could bring services in the area.
But could it bring empowerment to black people?
You see, I would put it this way.
Is it being formulated to
Well,
empower black people?
See, again, I said recently that we're using the term empowerment funny in a strange way. Okay, one has to empower oneself. No one can empower you, because I will not give you power. So why would we expect those who control to give us power? We have to take power. You see, we have to. I mean, there was a couple months ago, a year ago, there were those who were arguing, bring back black. They're right. we've lost the sense of wanting to be African or black. We are more divided among ourselves. We have no real vision of where we would like ourselves, where we see ourselves going in the future. That is part of the problem. We are not thinkers anymore. We are reactors, and we are essentially emoting. There is no plan. There's one book plan that I saw, and a blueprint for Black Power. I'm blocking the brother's name, Dr. Amos
Wilson.
Amos Wilson, which outlines an approach, but we are not following that. We are much more intent at trying to be personally wealthy.
What are you proudest of? What achievement are you proudest of in the black community of Brooklyn?
I think that what I'm proud of right now is a small group that meets in Brooklyn and is dealing with the political situation, what has been happening in this country for the last 400 years, where we are now, addressing the issues of plantation mentality and fighting for a change. To me, that gives me hope again in Brooklyn.
Reverend Oliver, Dr. Russell, I'd like to thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. Good afternoon.